So right now I'd like to talk about a story that brought me to the point of being able to share all of these accomplishments with all of you. Just like all of you, I have personal experiences that don't really match anybody else's. When reflecting on myself and what got me to my graduation and to these 4 years of college, I think of my experiences, and the most pivotal one at this point was a car accident that I was in on March 7th of 2019. So I'll start off the story with being on spring break in Tennessee with a group of my really good friends. Everything was going really well. I ended up coming home and was going to visit a friend the day before going back up to Grand Valley. I had a new to me car, a used car that I had just gotten like 3 months ago. And so I hopped on the freeway to my friend's house. Short little backstory, I had major traffic on the freeway. The patching crew was out and I had to slow stop. The truck behind me did not stop and rear-ended me at about 60 miles an hour before falling sideways onto my vehicle and kind of balancing there. And it was a fatality, meaning somebody behind me passed away and several other individuals were injured. And then I do want to just give a warning for anybody who's been in a similar experience. The next few pictures might be a little bit triggering, so maybe just avoid those. So this is March 7th, 2019. I'll kind of point out the pictures here. That was my car after they had all the steps I got out of it. This was the truck that had rear-ended me right here, and then that's the truck on top of my car. So definitely a super scary experience. I kind of debated in my head before coming up here how I wanted to tell this story. I did kind of just give you a little backstory of it, but I thought the most raw and vulnerable way to do it was to just read straight out of my journal. After going through this, I ended up in therapy, and my therapist challenged me to write down everything that I experienced, just so I kind of remember it for later on and was able to work through it. So I'm just gonna go right ahead and read that for you guys. On March 7th, I had a terrible feeling as I left my house. I was warned to take a side street, not 994, because it was backed up. And I said, okay. I hopped on 994 and I was on my way. I mean, you're pretty stubborn. So right after the 10-mile ring, traffic started to get really bad. I remember having a really bad feeling and slowing to a frustrated, impatient stop. Not 5 seconds later, I looked up into my rearview mirror to see the grill of a truck coming at me fast. I saw the white car behind me practically explode into a million pieces. I wanted to get out and help, but before I had another second to think it all happened. I thought of my friend and how he would blame myself for my death his entire life. I thought of my parents and Gina, my sister, and how I never get to say goodbye. I selfishly thought about my new car and how it would be destroyed, all in the course of a split second. I was jolted and awoke to the familiar smell of smoking metal, shards of glass in my lap, shaking limbs, and a throbbing. I was sideways in the driver's seat. The dash in front of me was dark, as if the sheet had settled on top, but the color was white and it had metal circles in a vertical line. I knew instantly I was under the truck that I had seen. The top of my car was pressing down on my shoulders as both of my hands and torso reached towards the passenger seat of the car. My driver's side window was shattered. I grabbed the rear view and tipped it down and saw the emergency light. It was throbbing. I then looked around to check my limbs for numbness or pain. Nothing to my surprise. I screamed for help, not knowing if anyone was around. A few seconds later, a black man appeared at my window, visibly surprised that I was alive, and called 911 as I fumbled for my phone, my license, anything. He told me the police officers were on their way. I started to cry once he left. A female cop came to the window, and after a few moments of sirens and talking, the first thing I asked her was if the person in the other car was okay, to which she responded no, and I immediately started to cry. I don't know how long went by before I became impatient. I spent the next eternity resembling minutes, trying to save myself, trying to be my own hero. I fumbled with the console, the mirror, the sunshade, everything. I grabbed my lanyard and gave it to the cop. Firefighters were taking turns explaining what was going to happen. So just a quick introduction. So at this point, they were trying to stabilize my vehicle because they didn't want to pull me out without, like, for fear of it falling further on top of me and basically taking me on the spot. So they had to put something kind of under here, and then they were also using the jaws of life on my passenger side door to try and get me out of there. And then they were also like shoving a tarp through the passenger side window because they were afraid that if they were able to like stabilize the truck, that my dash would just shatter. So they wanted a tarp on top of me, so the blast would come. Let's see, where was I? Okay, none of it mattered. I wanted to get myself out. Skip ahead past the drilling and the screaming and the tarp and the crying. I told the firefighter to stop. I knew that I could get out by removing the center console and having someone drag me out. I just needed a little bit more wiggle room. He agreed to try and dragged my top half out while I freed my legs. Once I was on the gurney, I felt so much better. The chill set in as the adrenaline stopped, but I was safe. Okay, deep breath. So that is a hard story to tell. After all of this occurred, I was sent to the ER by ambulance. They wanted to obviously made me a trauma and wanted to make sure that I didn't have any other injuries past this like black eye and soreness. All my scans came back really good, and I was admitted to hospital observation for that night, just to again make sure everything's fine. My parents came in after about an hour or so, which was really difficult. That was the first time I've ever seen my father cry, and all my friends came in to see me too. So definitely a tough. So when I tell this story, I usually get the same or similar types of reactions. The first one is that I was lucky. I remember the state policeman came into my hospital room and kind of just explaining what went on, some things about the driver, what happened. And he said I was lucky because the box truck didn't have any cargo in it at the time. He said if there was cargo in it, it would have just totally like pancaked me right on the spot. I probably wouldn't be here telling this story today. I was also famous at that hospital, so all of the nurses were like coming into my room like, oh my gosh, I saw you on the news, like all these things. I was like, okay, well, whatever. So everybody's like, you're so lucky to be alive. So that's one of the reactions. The next one is that everything happens for a reason. One of my personal favorites, I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more as we keep going. And then the third one is be thankful. Be thankful you're alive, be thankful it was first, which is true. But those are kind of the three reactions that we usually get. So all of these reactions do have something in common, and it's that it looks for an underlying reason that this occurred. So what is the reason that this happened? What is the reason that I should be thankful or that I'm lucky? Well, there really isn't an underlying reason. So in the following weeks, it was really gruesome to juggle all of these emotions as to why this event occurred. So what was the reason that this woman behind me passed away? That was one of my big things. I felt so guilty for something that I couldn't control. I felt so guilty that she had passed. Was it her time? Was it a quick death? Those are the things that I was thinking about. Or what was the reason that this man that was driving this truck was on the road that day? Did he even care? Like, a life was lost. Like, did he care about that? So I was blaming the truck driver for all my anxiety. I was blaming myself for not trusting my gut to not hop on the freeway that day. I took it out on my friends who constantly had to listen to vent, cry, and go through these like intense emotional panic attacks. I even got asked to be in a news report by Fox 2 for my miracle. And I politely accepted. I didn't know that weeks later it would be so tolling on my mental health that I did that. But I obliged. I had this news report woman come into my house and interview me about the miracle that I was in and how lucky I was. And so when I was making this presentation, I was debating whether I should show that video. And gosh, no, I did not want my video being shown on the screen. Nobody really wants to hear their own voice in the video, so I'm not going to do that. But if you're really curious, type in my name on Google, it'll pop up pretty quickly. But in a nutshell, on the news, I frame myself kind of I started believing that perception of, I was saved for a reason. I think I actually said that in that video, that I was saved for a reason. Like now I want to go be an ER nurse, which somehow ended up being true. But that was kind of what the narrative that I was starting to believe, that I was saved for a reason. Which, transitioning it kind of puts into the play this like idea of destiny and this idea of blame. I was destined to get hit by a truck, like that's insane. But these internal thoughts that I was having in response to this event leads to grappling with that idea of blame. So we use that idea of everything happens for a reason as an excuse to grow, avoid growth and face challenges head on. Terrible things like this and the aftermath of them happen for reasons that we have absolutely no control over. And that's kind of the idea of my presentation here. I have no reason to feel guilty about the outcome. Yes, it's a terrible event and never should have happened, but I needed control after what had went on so that I wasn't stuck with these internal feelings and emotions that I was dealing with. So here we go. In the few weeks after this accident, I did have a friend convince me to go to therapy. I knew that I needed to process my intense like driving and freeway anxiety that I was feeling. And PTSD related flashbacks, all these things. But as I was going through therapy, mind you, I've never done this before. I've never gone to therapy. I've never, had to deal with that. I started to take the opportunity to deal with parts of myself that I wasn't okay with and that I wanted to address that weren't dealing with this accident. So I realized some things about myself that I definitely would not have until I started picking apart those layers in therapy. So for example, if you notice the right-handed column, what you see on the screen, those are the things that I talked about at the very beginning of my presentation. So on the left-hand side are the things that I started with. So firstly, words in blue. I was very avoidant. I avoided true fierce conversations in my life. Prior to this accident, I had a toxic relationship that I could not get myself out of. It was over and over and over. If conversations with this person became difficult, I would shut down, get really emotional, cry. I could not get out of this this cycle. I had no boundaries set in place for this relationship. But as I went through therapy, I started to practice having those intentional conversations. I would have in-person discussions with this person about what I needed from the relationship, what I learned about myself, and how to proceed. And we ended up ending on fine terms, I guess I would say. But I know now that I am usually poor about building boundaries, and now I'm, learning how to set better boundaries for myself, and I'm in a very healthy relationship. So that was one thing that changed as I went through therapy. The second thing, the word in green, I went from being very passive to very assertive, or at least more assertive, I guess. You can't really put a cap on that. That's just something that you grow with. But I did start out very passive, and I thought about it in terms of like my own life and what I value. I was on autopilot. Every single day, I was just busy doing, work, school, all these things. I rarely put in the time for relationships and things that should have mattered more in my life. And definitely after the scary experience in therapy, I was able to kind of solidify what relationships and friendships I need in my life and which ones are, how that's most important. I feel like now I have a better understanding of how to keep work at work, and how to value those relationships in my life instead of letting myself be overworked. Another thing that kind of goes along with that assertiveness is solidifying my own values and my belief systems. Kind of an example of that is as I was grappling with the two jobs that I got offers for just recently. I had to be really upfront honest with myself. What do I value in a career? Do I value the organization's values? Do I value the people I work with? Like, what are the things that I need to make this decision? So obviously, I think that pulls from what I learned in therapy as well. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, although starting on self-awareness, so prior to therapy, I was totally unaware of the need for self-awareness. And that was because I had no necessity to choose my reaction to anything. I had stress, school-related, work-related stress, but honestly, I never had a difficult situation like this accident where I had to push myself to learn and grow and challenge myself. I truly, didn't need to. I had a really, a stable childhood. I didn't really have any real challenges. I never faced death head on as a child, maybe a couple of times. But I had a very, stable family in childhood for the most part. So I would say that stuff's all still true to this day. But I get to choose how I react to things now. I've learned how to react to things in my life that don't go perfectly. And let me tell you, after this accident, a lot of things didn't go perfectly. I'd say not even 4 to 5 months after this event occurred, I had a good friend of mine pass away in a motorcycle accident. That set me back in my therapy because I was just learning how to get over that driving anxiety. And then all of a sudden this happens and I have to deal with all these emotions all over again. So it's definitely a domino effect, but I think the tools that I was getting in therapy and that I was practicing using really helped with my progress. So I was able to practice that resilience and just kind of think about things in terms, like logically, in terms of, can I fix this right now, or is this going to have to be something that I can't control, I can't change, and I have to work with those emotions. So it was definitely an uncomfortable experience. Therapy was very uncomfortable for me, but it had to be uncomfortable in order to grow. Use this experience to work through those emotions, that anxiety. So the key word here is work. Using all of these resulting emotions as a catalyst for self-growth. And over time, I began eliminating that left-hand column and practicing using the right-hand column. So that's kind of where the word came in that I was talking about. So I want to do a deeper dive self-awareness because I had that little bubble around it. I think that's my biggest takeaway from this entire story. And the thing that's going to help me most is I leave college here in a few days, weeks, and enter my future career. So remember, I'm not a psych major. I've had to take maybe like one psychology class for nursing. So don't judge me with my little psychology today definition. But I try to find a simple little definition that pertains to what I'm talking about today. So according to an article I found on Psychology Today, self-awareness involves monitoring our stress, our thoughts, our emotions, and our beliefs. And I'm in complete agreement with this definition. There's nothing wrong with that. But I did want to expand it a little bit to apply to my own story. So my own definition is self-awareness as a quality where you transform the way you think through the interpretation of things that happen that are outside of your control. So the things you can control in response to terrible events are your own thoughts, emotions, actions, your reactions. Like that Psychology Today article states. But you cannot control how your day goes, who says what to you. So you can work on self-awareness as a quality that changes the way you think. About facts that aren't fair or right, in order to change them. So thinking back on my very last therapy session, my therapist actually did an activity with me where I had to find words in a magazine that summed up our work together. And I had to glue it to a stone. And the whole idea of this activity was that whenever I'm feeling anxious in the car or otherwise, I grab that stone and I look at the word and it's like a tactile thing that I can touch to kind of decrease anxiety. So I ended up finding the word story in the magazine. And I remember at the time, I was kind of like, okay, I just want to get this over with, like it's kind of a silly activity, you know what I mean? But looking back, that was honestly probably one of the most changing things for me, and the word story was the best one to pick. Because I can now look back on this accident as just an event that happened on my timeline and my story. I can look back with gratitude now that I changed so much as a human as a result of this whole experience. I pushed myself to step outside of my comfort zone and go to therapy, pull myself out of every panic attack I had, just kind of define a new way of reacting to the things that happen in my life. And absolutely, I still think about things that I could change from that day. There's not a whole lot of them. And I still get panic attacks every once in a while. I'm sure a lot of us can say that, but I don't dwell on those things anymore. I use them as kind of a driving force for growth. And I think that's what we're all here today. Leadership is about that growth and that journey. So I want to leave you all with a quote from Maya Angelou, the amazing poet and civil rights activist. that I think sums my presentation pretty well. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but only you can decide to not be reduced. Thank you.
We got people on Zoom saying her story was amazing.
You mentioned, I know a lot of people who possibly, right? What are some of the ways that you do from the school?
Good question. That can be really overwhelming. I've been exactly pretty much the worst of places. I've had them alone in my car. That's kind of one of the way when I use that stone, I like kind of, just try and use that as a distraction, like a tactile distraction. So that really works for me. I think it's more about just like my shoulders for you. I've been in panic attacks with my family. I didn't mention any of this in my presentation, but my family did a lawsuit at the truck driver. And so that was probably one of the more stressful parts of this entire thing, that I don't talk about it. That was kind of something that I didn't necessarily want, but they wanted for me. So it was kind of grappling with that whole situation on top. And so I remember multiple texting, or at least just like emotional like breakdowns just right in front of them. And they had absolutely no idea what to do with it. So it's kind of just, I think just focusing on my breathing, something that really works for me. I do the, inhale, hold it, exhale, the 4 seconds in each, that really helps for me. I think what else? Just, I guess if you're in a situation where you're kind of overstimulated, I've had them at like really enclosed spaces at parties and things like that, or just like anywhere where I feel like very claustrophobic, like how I was in an accident. Just like getting out and getting a breath of fresh air. So I don't know, I think it's more about just kind of finding something that works for you, but for me, it's definitely like that distraction technique, breathing. Yeah, it's scary. It's not fair, it's not fun, but you learn how to do it. I just want to say it's like that was like my first thought. I'm telling you like a split second, but like I can't even like depict what I saw in that mirror, because I saw it all happen. I saw the impact. And I knew it was coming back for me. So you had like a split second to think like about what you can do, and I had nothing to do. I couldn't, like, we were basically in a parking lot on the freeway. Like that's how everybody stopped. So it's not like I could like sort of out of and really do anything. So yeah, it was scary. And I think that was one of the most guilty feelings that I had, was that woman passed away. Like there was actually no rhyme or reason for it. Yeah, that's what I felt.
Interpretation of subways or that point onwards. Where were the places where you felt you see practical focus? So from right and on to about subways, you said kind of something like what are some stories that you kind of could share about that? The fact that that's all that you see it evolve.
I think that was a tough part of making this presentation. Was like, I wanted to focus on things that were not that accident. I didn't want that to be my primary focus. I wanted to like try and think of examples. What I can talk to you guys about how I like using the tools that I learned and the research that I learned. I think honestly, one of the biggest ones is that relationship that I got out of. I think that was probably and that was early on, so that was like my first like vacation that like, okay, I have to put my own voice, I can decide how I want to I think that, and then also, I don't know, just being more intentional about how I'm spending my time. I think I used to be a workaholic, and now it's a lot more for me about relationships, a lot more about family. I try to motivate myself to death, and that's, school and things like that, just come before everything else is important to me. And I think that's a big part of self-awareness too, because you're making that intentional decision to say, okay, I'm gonna focus in on this and not, on the gazillion other things that I have to do. So, absolutely. And then also just, that was one of, that was a hard week for me because I had a couple different options and they were all great. And I had to sit down and say, what is really important to me? What can I change? And like, do I want to make a change? Do I want to stay with that now? So I don't know. I think you just, as you go through, you kind of just see progress in yourself, and it's good. It's nice to see those things.
Well, can we give Nicole one more round of applause, everyone?
Of conversations and kind of elaborate or do whatever, okay, and then we'll pick it back up.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Mira. And if they can get wrong, I currently work at an expert office, and I'm hoping to graduate by the end of the year with my master's. I am into public relationships and communication. I also like to nitpick words. Today, I want to talk to you about cultural competency while briefly mentioning the culture fit. Remember? So what makes a person cultural or culturally competent? We hear the term so many, everywhere, like different social justice platforms, official spaces, interviews, media initiatives, and we hear so much as And so real quick, does anyone know how many competencies there are assigned to this piece? Number great. Yeah. Except for you, you work here. Wow. Look at that. There are 6 competencies. We, the cream of the crop, are sitting in this room aiming for practice design, still leadership. So that means by the end of this year, we are master problem solvers that bring empowerment. We are socially responsible because we respond to change with our high moral ethic because our living skills are so long. We sound amazing on paper. But by whose standards are we considering the leadership excellence? Is it PLA? Is it Grand Valley? Is it West Michigan? Or is it America? Or are we just basic byproducts of middle-class Western academia? So let's kind of define the word competency for a second. It generally means the ability to do something well. So one area wants to we sum it up as acquiring a skill or to be sufficient in terms of knowledge. We learn to have enough knowledge and we develop good judgment. Then now we work on they make sense, right? But once you add cultural competency, it's not as simple. Like how do you reach a point where you get to a level where you have enough knowledge about a person, a society, or a culture? Like how do you master sufficiency in any culture? Well, we're learning to be confident, and what are we learning, and what are we passionate about? George Abel, who's a German philosopher, he actually said, these are very, very, very ancient metaphors. We learn from history that we don't want to teach. So basically, for example, every generation thinks that here are the enlightenment era was there. And I mean, if you look at our generation right now, it's pretty sweet. However, Hegel is actually challenging the learning attitude of humanity. Because obviously the current social and political issues that we face today, we clearly haven't figured out. This is the only thing that's learning that we're doing. Those problems are like either recycled or future. But if I can believe my mom, who has drilled this quote to us kids, to this day, she still says it. Many are intelligent and very pure ones. There are many. Nothing we will, but we can lead to cultural arrogance or cultural. So I think we have a future. First culture. Just to give you a little bit of background. When colonialism or Western expansion ended, and with the dramatic increase of science and technology, there was a major shift in human needs. So many Americans began living, so after World War II, they began living overseas. They began living overseas. And and then in the 1990s, the U.S. Census published their first 200,000 Americans abroad. Then scholars took a particular interest in the American children that grew up outside of the country. As much as I find labels really redundant, with the big institution, bear with me, because these terms are actually cross-cultural kids collectively refer to a person or group of people that have meaningfully engaged or interacted with two or more cultural environments. This applies to most of us, because whether we are aware of it or not, we are constantly interacting with diverse cultures in our workplaces, school, CLA. Our culture kid is a subgroup of cross-cultural kids. So, and it refers to a person or a group that spent their childhood overseas because of their parents' choice to work abroad, because of the parents. Okay. And you can see from this chart, cross-cultural kids is an umbrella term that actually encompasses all these subgroups, including children of refugees, immigrants, international adoptees, biracial, multiracial, bicultural, multicultural, on and so forth. But I'm focusing on traditional third culture kids, and they have their own varieties, including North Nebraska, missionary kids, corporate friends, and kids of foreign services. Obama is a notable case. He's ethnically half Kenyan, half American here, but half white. And he spent his childhood between Indonesian and white because of his parents' vocation. His dad was musician. So, by the way, TCK very negatively stereotyped as translucent and has instability or being culturally. The positive stereotype is resilient, flexible, adaptable, culturally. I'm also a very typical TCK. I am born in South Korea. So when I was 3 months old, I left the country. I graduated. The usually linguistic assignments, I was transplanted in 50 different countries, in 13 different schools, under 5 different education systems, using 4 languages for K through 12. The longest time I went to, the longest period or the same school that I went to was my last junior, senior year in preschool to so educated by both Western and Eastern philosophy, including on the I didn't choice because they constantly navigate between multiple, often conflicting worldviews. I just end this whole presentation right now with flex and say that I'm the one that's really competent. So, we're gonna move on. So without underestimating my, experience and story, I want to emphasize that my background is only an external trait. And that my experience alone is not a skill. And it does nor does it make me competent. I mean, obviously, those experiences help me to maybe ask different questions or look at things in a different angle. But I'm in equally in the same position as someone in terms of learning who doesn't translate it. So the point is, the minute or the second I settle in my sufficient of cultural knowledge is when it becomes problematic. Then I subconsciously put myself superior over other people who I think that have less or less. This is cultural area. So I think that's fun. This is the second example. So welcome to Papua New Guinea. It is located in the southern hemisphere, right under the equator, shares the border with Indonesia, and Australia is right there. It is the second largest island in the world. It has over 800 tribes with their own distinct language and culture. And these are not dialects, these are official languages. And this is the flag. Fort Moresby is the main capital. We drive about 7 hours west here, this is the central province. You'll reach a little tribe called Nekio. Nekio population in the early 90s, about 20,000, today it's about 30,000. This is a typical Nekio kitchen. Life is simple. There's no running water, no electricity, and they are known for 3 things: mosquitoes, dust, and pigs. When Papua New Guinea gained its independence from the Australian colony in 1975, so did the Papua New Guinea pig, the Nekio. Which means instead of confining them, like having them fenced in, they were like rural. And what you have to know is, pigs are a valuable source of income in the village, and the socioeconomic status is defined by the number of pigs generated. So the Banner family will own about 10 to 50, middle class 50 to about 100, and then the rich would be about 100 to 500 to 100,000. So it's no exaggeration when I say pigs are everywhere. You can imagine population 20,000 with their pigs. In our 7th year living here, my dad recognized 2 hygiene issues. And one was, there are no toilets for humans. So if you need to go, the ground is your limit. And number 2, a lot of roaming pigs meant a lot of food. There was a covered in it. There was a dry fecal matter, which caused like germs, which contributed to respiratory illnesses, like bronchitis pneumonia, which is a really real problem in the village. So that's what we do. He campaigned for toilets and let's fence the pigs. Now, that is cross-culturally trained and he's culturally competent, so he knew enough to avoid band-aid solutions using trouble. Okay, so with extra questions. He surveyed the area, researched appropriate technology that fit within the Nekio context, met with the tribal head chiefs, had an open discussion with the village people, and this wasn't like a day's work, it was like months and months of like preparation. Okay, and then using his own personal savings, he campaigned that designated toilets for humans and designated spots for pigs would limit the pollution that affects diseases and right? So that's the prototype that was built for humans. Is it amazing?
Yeah.
Wow! It's amazing in its own head. The campaign lasted 1 year and it was an epic fail. Why do you think that?
Perhaps because they have their tradition custom and those key steps.
Sure. Like what? Like, okay.
Like how?
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, like go like a social amount of years, kind of how they've been living their life.
Let's dig into that. So you're on the right track, but why? like, give me details.
Perhaps maybe somebody, let's say, is an outsider, right? And they come in and they say, hey, this would be a really good idea. And the people in that town don't recognize them as one of their own. It seems as somebody from the outside is trying to, I guess, somewhat gentrify.
You're on the right track, that's right, you're not allowed to talk anymore. That idea has naturally stemmed from Korean lifestyle training. So what were some of my issues? Is that things were optional. Things were because of the cage. And toilets are built in designated areas. Because obviously food is dirty. But Mekio, the village itself, is not a life operation. The two things you have to know about the village is the social structure of the village is male centered, which means the women are the ones who physically labor to maintain the children. And the second thing is bananas are the main source of food in that place. And banana trees is enormous and enormous. So remember, there's 25% banana. So combining the pigs, combining the pigs, is the women have somehow find food just to feed the pigs, then to collect the pig waste, transport it, fertilize, and then take it to the garden, fertilize it when the gardens are like miles away. I mean, their daily labor alone was burdensome. Nobody has time to do it. So, but for this reason, the pigs are set free and the royal people livestock back in the past. So that's why they were released. So, and also, because of the Mekio environment alone, the grounds are marsh. That's why the gardens were miles away. The slashing agriculture. So they had to find certain spots to do their farming, and it was away from where they lived for all marsh. So obviously, outhouses are built in a camp in months because it's going to flood. And then who's going to take care of that nasty mess? The women are going to do that. I mean, make the people. So which leads to the concept of hygiene. So human poo is pig food. Pig poo is banana tree food. And so the concept of hygiene is what the Mekio people thought versus what my dad thought, defining what was dirty versus hygiene, which is no matter. So that is why I did this. So what that learned was that smart. Because he has wrapped the comprehensive understanding, or you guys want to be academic, or holistic. I'm so tired of it. Everybody loves that one. The holistic understanding. He lacks the holistic understanding of integrated social, like economic systems, social structures, and then acknowledging what was essential versus not essential, then defining value systems. So the biggest lesson for him was the fact that his standard of hygiene had always been ownership of the people. And his arrogance showed, like he had to acknowledge, like his arrogance of thinking that my culture, my knowledge was superior over Mexico. And then his ignorance of him thinking that he's faster than the Mexico culture and knowledge for him to fix and change things. And so this is we don't really learn unless the learning fit with our ideas. So we subconsciously learn, I go right there, to remain proud in our own knowledge. I'll let that kind of settle in for a little bit. Like I'm not just sitting here and be like, you guys are never learning it, but it applies to me too, because if you really think about it, we're smart and we're capable and we have ideas and we suggest it, but how do we know if that is actually a thing? How do you know if that's so it does give you, it does kind of have you pause and think about what are we learning and how? So, let me end with this one. We are all competent because everybody has something to contribute. We're all competent. And, but if we're just learning to collect or earn the number of like degrees, certifications, awards, recognition, all of these achievements alone doesn't necessarily make us culturally competent, nor does it really make us competent. You want to that true. So because there's diversity, you have diversity and constantly evolving. It doesn't just settle at one spot. So it is worth taking the time to jump, reflect on our own learning attitude. What and how am I learning to be a better contributor for other people and for society? And where are the areas of my life that I need flexibility to get? So those are just things that I want to do. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
So from that, one of the things that we told us was that we kind of stuff we kind of learned is from previous and up. And I feel like how does one person go and process thinking for long-term memory, foundation stuff that you don't in the past. Example, right? He's basing it on his own knowledge, and it's hard for us to really. We can understand things, but it's hard to comprehend it when we're all basing it on what we previously know. So, like, how does a person? How would you recommend a person make that transition? How do they put that limit on being ignorant or being arrogant?
Great. So you're also good, you're opposite. Like, no one can do that at the end of the day. And it's exactly what you have, like you kind of answer it yourself in the question. You have to be very curious. And at the end of the day, there's no such thing as like we're not being like, okay, oh my goodness, there are 10 international students competent. Say hi, if you have nothing, if you don't have any questions, move on. Like, you know, like you can't know. If you do come to a point where you recognize this attention, like, am I playing? I'm not sure. Don't think about globally, but think about this globally. So, for example, like, there's always that person in your family or your friend group, professors, feel like you just don't get along. Like, you just don't get what you get. So then, how the question for us is like, how am I going to recognize their culture? That culture meaning whatever it is, and then my culture, and then how am I going to integrate an understanding where I can just acknowledge the difference and let it be, and then find peace that just to be okay with it. Because at the end of the day, we're not here to fix people. Nobody's like, you know, we get offended when somebody comes like, yeah, you know what you're doing is wrong and wrong. Like, are you gonna listen? No. So that's why people are so complex, and this is the beauty of it. Like, there's no one-dimensional one way of things. We just have to roll with it and offer it very funny, and that's also a process and enjoy it. And then later with that, then we can actually understand. Yeah, so my dad was like, never judge a person until they die. But after the person dies, then you can feel how they live. Because if you judge them in their 20s, and if you grew up and matured and really turned out well in their 50s, you don't do that part. But if you judge them like this, the person doesn't stay like that, right? So that's why I think it's a lot more complex. think we answered your own question. I don't know if I answered it, but I think we get where I'm going, right? Yes.
Next, you spoke multiple different languages. Was there a language barrier when your dad, like during this example with your dad? Was there a language barrier? in place, or-
No, so it does linguist, and, by the time we were, he was there, then we were already there 17 years. So we were all.
So what's your, I guess, recommendation when there's like that extra, when there's a language barrier in place, and there's that extra like complex aspect? Like you're curious, but also like you don't understand what you're saying.
Right.
Your representation.
Well, it depends. Like, for example, I work at the registrar's office, we have phone calls for international students. And I have coworkers that, international students get a lot of money, so because their English have accents, I see them mistreated, and then they have terrible service, and I can't stand that. So I actually call out my program, like, don't talk to me, because they're a person, like, just because they don't speak fluently, doesn't mean they're dumb, like, they are probably a lot smarter than me. So I say that. But when I talk to them, there are times where I know I'm excited, but the best thing you can do is the person knows your sincerity by your body. Like, you can speak slower, but not as a mission. Every time you like, what is your first? You ever? Nobody understands the birth certificate. You have to be what is your birthday or date. Like, what's so hard for that now? The whole time. So, the language, like, if you're trying to start a conversation, like a deep conversation with somebody with like a language barrier, you know, that's not gonna work. And you gotta establish a relationship, right? So, but sometimes just body language. So when I was volunteering for the refugees in Ohio, where I met with them this week for English, training. But I realized I didn't want to just go there once a week, just not. What they needed was, they needed me to go, I needed to go like to the store, read the label, you know what I did. For one person that allergy, they need to know what was in the food in here, like, they just wanted to know that. So you just have to be a friend, like, and you don't have to go out. So, again, I don't want to think that for like basic, just like we're doing a service, we're not gonna, I'm just being present. I have skills that we need in the American economy.
Well, yeah, thank you for. I'd like to learn more about, I think you said, from like only learn knowledge to our ideal. I'd like to learn more about that. I was wondering if I learn something and that's incorrect, and I can do that on a detail.
So you have an ideal, and then you learn something,
And incorrect.
and then it corrects your ideal, then that's your learning process. Again, I don't know the standard of what's right or wrong. I'm not that person, don't ask me. I'm gonna say what everybody does. I think that's just, and that's the beauty of personal conviction and understanding too. So that could just be, I don't know how to answer that. Concern. Feel free to. These are just examples. And then we will have a discussion, keep working on those thank yous, take a break if you need it, and then we'll go get started with sadly, but also excitedly, we're about to. Yeah.
All right, let's give it up for Stephanie. So today I'm going to talk about cultural competency. So how long does it take to make an assumption about someone? You've all heard the common rule of thumb, right? An interviewer, classmate, stranger, they'll all form an impression of you, your character, and your personality. An impression that is merely unmistakable, all of these things that you need. So as I'm sitting here right now, you're all probably going to discuss assumptions about me. The answer to the most common assumptions that I have been asked, yes, I am on film. Yes, my top 3, Clifton strength are learner, achiever, empathy, surprise, maybe, maybe not. No, I'm not extrovert actually. And yes, I am taller than 5 feet. Assumptions are things that we accept to be true, but this is assumed without proof based on external evidence. But assumptions can also be deceiving, right? Some of us hold invisible identities that we hide from others as a result of potential stigmas that may cause harm to us as a result of exposure. Invisible identities can include things such as sexual orientation, religion, chronic illness, mental illness, racial passing, among many other things. And as I sit here and talk about, hidden identities, so when you ask me, Stephanie, what is your own hidden identity then? Well, my hidden identity, I'm actually a Jacker. While there are several intersecting identities and dimensions of the undocumented immigrant experience, I'm here today to talk about my experiences as an undocumented child living in America. My story begins in Mexico, who has all visited Mexico before. Okay, awesome. So the date is March 1st, 2001. I'm 4 years old, and at this point, life has been pretty simple. At the moment of my life, my few favorite things is my grandpa, the taste of my grandma's buttered tortillas, ice cream, also known as helado, and the feeling of a wet farm earth between my toes. And yes, those are in that order. I did not know at this point, however, that is ignorance was bliss. It was early in the morning when I was suddenly awakened by my father lifting me out of bed and onto his arm. Half awake, I noticed 2 dudes. And at this point, at a state of confusion, I began to ask him if everything was okay. As I was reading my mind, however, he suddenly interrupted me and said that we were going to take a trip and promised me that we got there to get me ice cream. As he suggested ice So this is actually pictures of for Mexico. And then this is me when I from this point moving forward, life changed forever. For the next years, I watched my parents work endlessly from sunrise to sunset, chasing the American dream. On weekends, my sister and I would join my parents picking strawberries, lettuce, apples, or whatever else was being harvested during that time. Although we now lived in the land of possibilities, we were birds trapped in a golden cage. We built a life within the shadows. And at this time, we were living in a resource center. Although we were living in employer-provided housing, the housing that was provided was nothing more than renovated for stable. And this is a picture of like the most accurate representation of what it was like. I don't have that picture, but as you can see, this actually does look like a renovated shack. And in addition to that, our local school was not only severely underfunded, but also understaffed. Most teachers were unqualified to meet the needs of immigrant children. Our own care officer is like, now I know most of you will make it to school, but if you work hard, maybe one day your kids or grandkids will be able to be someone one day. And because most children have parents that were forced to work long hours, we were left to do whatever we wanted. Steal, fight, play, you name it, it probably happened. Because my parents are undocumented farm workers with little to no employment protections, days have passed without us seeing them. After school, my sister and I would come home and talk about our future and dreams. And during lonely daydreaming hours at home, my sister would often ask me, Stephanie, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I would answer, oh, I want to be white when I grow up. I had this morbid idea that only if I was blonde, blue eyed, and my skin was light, all my skin was through, and I would stop living this horrible life. Eventually, through hard work and a little bit of luck, my parents were finally able to save enough money to buy a car and find better employment out of Florida. On December 2003, at the age of 6, we moved to Michigan. Although life wasn't easy here too, and I think similar discriminations and hardships, we found a generally accepting community that was willing to support my family and I. And this was happening during the most challenging time of our lives. Although I didn't know it at the time, because of my interest that teachers, mentors, and community members in supporting me, I finally began to feel like I didn't need to be blonde and blue-eyed to accomplish my dreams. These individuals pushed me to be the best version of myself and reminded me that my legal status wasn't the only defining factor. Because of them, I became a dreamer. And against all odds, I graduated high school, attended community college, successfully graduated from GE Honors College. And today, I'm proud to say that I am obtaining my master's degree in higher education with the mission of advancing equitable access and equal opportunity for marginalized student populations.
Woo!
Today and reveal my personal realities and lived experiences because I realized that I just don't have the energy to be anyone else other than who I really am. The truth is that undocumented immigrants are people too, not just numbers or concepts of the political game. Regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, in a society where it is estimated that 1.8 million Organization immigrants are undocumented children in the age of 18 or older, extending great support, empathy, and access is vital for the advancement of vulnerable children and youth who have no control over the decision to be brought to the U.S. Although DACA has provided some eligible undocumented youth like myself who were brought to the U.S. as children with deferred action from deportation, a valid Social Security number, work authorization for 2 years, which can be renewed. The reality is that DACA holders only represent half of the estimated undocumented population. And for those of you that may not know, you can't apply for DACA anymore. So if you have it, good for you, you have it, renew it. But if you didn't make the cut and were eligible, you can no longer qualify for it. For non-DACA recipients, the barriers hindering undocumented youth streams of advancement is higher depending on where they live. In addition to not being eligible for federal financial aid programs and public benefits, regardless of DACA status, in many states, added barriers to undocumented people can include not being eligible for select private loans, for many institutional and private scholarships, not being eligible for driver's license, and this includes 34 states, including Michigan, not being eligible to have a Social Security number, not having access or limited access to healthcare, not being eligible for some careers where licensure or background checks are required. So in some states like Indiana, if you're a nurse, a lawyer, doctor, and state board, you're not eligible. You can spend 4 or 5, however X amount of years in school, but because you have no Social Security number, work authorization, that's it. And you also don't have the ability to travel where official state ID is required. So think about it, like when do you use your driver's license? Use it when you go to a bank, use it when you get on an airplane, you use it for so many simple things that we all sometimes forget about how essential that is. But those are all extra added barriers that undocumented people don't have. Nationally, for instance, only 19 states have tuition equity provisions that allow undocumented students to pay in-state tuition, while others have restrictions and force students to pay out-of-state or international student fees forcing individuals to pay on average 1.4 times the cost of in-state tuition. In extreme cases, such as Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia, undocumented people are outright banned from enrolling in some or all of the state's public colleges and universities. Although DACA has provided some of us opportunities to live a more fulfilling and liberating life, I often feel survivor's guilt. And thinking about the people that were left behind to continue to live in generational impoverished communities like the one my family and I lived in when we first arrived to the US. I often ask myself and wonder if they were extended the same support, pathways, and equitable opportunities to achieve their American dream. And you see, that's the reality of being impacted by immigration. Not feeling trauma of the situation and feeling like your identity is fully defined by your limited legality and the things that you have no control over. The feeling that there's never going to be anything that I can do to help or change other people overcome similar situations. However, through my career path, I'm trying to find a more proactive way instead of a reactive way. Given the unique experiences I have been exposed to as a result of my limited legality, I've gained invaluable perspective. And this is so empowering. This is a way to heal because it no longer feels like something happened to me out of my control. I can respond to the situation and have self-autonomy. As a college, all of my experiences and respond to them. I have the ability to pull all of my experience into context and to move forward to create more inclusive systems in society, especially within higher education. Today, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my story because most undocumented people don't get the opportunity to share their lived experiences and are forced to live in the shadows their entire lives. As I get older, one thing I've learned is that my story is an exception to the rule, not the general rule. Because of my story, I've been convinced to all that dreams are possible. That if I was able to break every stereotype based on what I was classified as, Mexican, female, undocumented, first generation, and low income, you can too. You don't have to let our expectations become a reality. Regardless of the challenges that we face and the traumas endured, we have the power to transform our dreams into reality and to be the change that we see in the world. And with this, I want to transition into my favorite quote from T.D. Lawrence, which says, "Dreams aren't we all dreamers? It's only because men dreamt of flying that we're traveling in planes. Behind all achievements, we see the dreams of people who are brave enough to chase after them." And with that, I just wanted to go over some best practices for working with undocumented people. I think this is often a topic that is taboo. People don't want to say the wrong things or things about people, but the reality is that communication needs to be done. Tough conversations need to be done for people. Because as a result of not having these conversations and educating yourself, undocumented people are living in a void of lack of information. Not only educational, political, legal, like in all different aspects, they're living in the void. The first thing you can do is create safe spaces for anyone that comes out to you. So listen without interrupting, ask open-ended questions, and sit there in silence. Because sometimes that's all people want to do is to share their story. And be cognizant of terminology. So don't drop the I word, which is legal. That's often a very like politicized word, and it's often used in a very negative term and context. So just be mindful of the word that you're using when talking to people. Confidentiality. Remember that individuals are sharing their story because they trust you. And it's up to that person to share their status. It's not up to you. So always ask for their permission if you're referring that person to a service or resource. And the last important thing that I want to say is educate yourself. This is a topic that is so politicized. And it doesn't matter what way you lean, like this is people. We're not just numbers, it's not just political cons, these are stories. So take the time, do a quick, Google search, come talk to me, go to OMA, we have a peer support group on campus to help document students, but educate yourself. And also identify services. So if someone does, post you, we know how to help them. And together we can all create supportive pathways for not only undocumented people or DACA recipients, but marginalized students in general. Thank you.
Woo!
So, with the current nonprofit or what are they doing well right now?
Hmm.
And what are some areas where you
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think what we're doing well right now is that financial barriers are the biggest barriers, right? Because I only know this because I'm doing my thesis on it, but 75% of DACA recipients and undocumented people live within poverty, making less than $30,000 a year. And so I think nonprofits are doing a great job in offering those free or low cost legal resources. So they identify that as the biggest barrier, which then leads to access for higher education or, all these other things. So I think that's something to do well. Something that is not being done well, and I'm going to use the word that you don't like, holistic. But I think organizations in general are looking at holistic experience for that. Because right, it's not only financial, it's not only legal, it's also emotionally and mentally traumatic. And I think that's something that isn't addressed and is kind of overseen. And suicide rates among undocumented or DACA recipients are among the highest. And even now I'm doing my research, and because there's always like around being DACA or around being undocumented, people have chronic depression anxiety, which are 37% higher than any other population. And so I think that's what's missing, right? Because if we're not good personally, then we're not good anywhere else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So as a person, like, you're like in the thick of it, like you're doing research, you're in it, you're taking your story, your experience. So for people like, for somebody like me, where that is not my immediate social justice realm or something that I'm going to be actively working on, right? Because we all have our things. So what does it look like? Like, because right now it's so overwhelmed. There's so many platforms and everyone's saying, educate yourself, join here, and then it's like the funds are, we're all on this, but right now, America, they don't even have the black and white things figured out, right? So for us, like Asian and Latinos that try to fit into the story or the framework, what should be the application? I mean, that's what I would ask too, because I'm like, what is it fit? Like, should I be dependent, where it's like, oh, can the Democrats and Republicans figure it out so they can put their help, or is that the right action, or do we need to keep depending on private, like or like what is the mindset here as a immigrant? Because you and I both not from here, but we're here now. How do we respond to this American?
Great point. I think that even within the document community, all of our lives in either one political party or the other, the reality is that our reality is that we're all cons. And, for instance, Barack Obama, although I'm really thankful that passed DACA, passed it right before election for a very purposeful reason. And so I think to answer your question is, it all starts grassroots movement. Like, yes, I'm not saying that change can't be done within like the political sphere, but what undocumented folks need now are services and support within their own community. So a great resource is one education is dreams.org. I mean, if you are completely don't even know, like, not familiar with tech or undocumented immigration, like that's just a great starter. And you can actually filter by like your area what resources are there. And I think because it's such a personal sensitive issue, people will disclose to certain what they feel safe to do. And so if you're educating yourself on what's supposed to, you can help them that way because they're not going to go out there, right, and like limited legality. So I'm not saying that change can't be happening in the years, but I think it also. Yes, I do think that, and I think that you say that, like, I do think that it's just knowing that everyone is human, and sometimes we have no control over things that happen to us. And like the first presentation that was given us, like, there's not always like a why does this happen, right? Or the purpose of this happening is X, Y, Z. So just knowing that we are all human, and knowing that there is an element to it that at some point or another, we're all struggling in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, just humanizing the experience. I think right now it's just a black and white issue, and it's not, right? Because you could be adapted to like myself. I got rough when I was 4 and had no control over it, and just had to make the best of the situation. Or you could be someone fleeing, from gang violence in Honduras. Like, I don't know what the situation is, but knowing that every person has a story and that everybody's story is valid. And valid enough to be heard. So that's very familiar with this because she works at LA, which I also work with, but I guess just being more intentional. I think a lot of institutions, especially in 2015, I don't know if you all were aware of this, but the president at the time, which is President Trump, wanted to give access to ICE agents to come to campus, look at records, and detain students. That's problematic because if you have DACA and it's renewed, technically, right, you're fine, they can still detain you, but they have to eventually let you go. If you don't have that, then you're put in a very vulnerable situation. And when that was occurring, a lot of universities, U of M, Michigan State, Central came out and made public statements, but they didn't have a policy set in place to actually protect. And so that's something that I'm, and it's not like a one-step solution, it's constant evolution needs to happen. But for instance, Grand Valley offers financial assistance outside of DACA. So because undocumented DACA students don't qualify for financial services, they've created like a different scholarship specifically for DACA and undocumented recipients, which they could estimate the estimated family contribution through. In addition to that, they also created the support group, which is meant to support and create community for those that are impacted by immigration, whether it's themselves directly, whether they're DACA recipients, or whether a family member is undocumented. So there's that community access to it. Then we also have different, allies in campus that we can safely go and talk to. So we have someone from the Career Center, financial aid, someone within OMA, and advising that if students need help, they can safely go to. And then we also created a documented website. It's literally just Google GDS // DACA or documented. You have a whole list of resources there for you. So yeah, it's an ongoing movement that obviously everything's political, so having to navigate that, but yeah, we're getting somewhere. I'm really happy about it. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. All right.
Table discussion. If you have a question and you're thinking about
some things that you want to be thinking about, health, or friends, or colleagues, or
We'll pull it back large group in about 10, 15. 10, 15 minutes. That is not 10, 15 PM.